The candles were tall and white, the kind my father Graham ordered from some boutique in the city. They flickered every time someone laughed. That evening, people laughed a lot, mostly at me. I am Becky Vale. I was 31, sitting at the far end of my father's Maple Crest dining room, cutting my lamb while my family took turns dismantling everything I had built. It started casually. My brother Derek mentioned he had seen my product page while searching for something else. He said it the way you mention a strange smell. Then he said, "It still looks the same as when you started. Still the same 3 products." My cousin Sienna giggled and covered her mouth, the way she does when she wants to seem polite while being rude. My father Graham set down his wine glass, looked at me the way a teacher looks at a failing student, and said nothing. The silence was its own sentence. I kept cutting my lamb. My hands were steady. Under the table, I pressed my knee against the chair leg like an anchor. I knew how to survive dinner at Graham Vale's table. You breathe. You wait. You do not flinch. But that night, something was different. I just did not know it yet. My wellness brand was called Oro. I had started it 4 years earlier with my own savings, a second-hand label printer, and a kitchen table that doubled as a packaging station most nights. Oro made handcrafted body oils, balms, and wellness kits scented with natural ingredients I sourced myself. No shortcuts. No cheap fillers. Every product was designed by me, tested by me, shipped by me in the early days. I had not asked my family for money, advice, or connections. I already knew the answer. My father believed success was something you inherited or married into. Building something slowly from scratch was not impressive to Graham. That was desperation dressed as ambition. Derek worked in corporate finance and wore his suits like armor. He had never complimented Oro, but had twice called it Becky's little candle project in front of relatives, even though Oro had never sold a single candle. Sienna was polished and strategic, with a lifestyle following built on pretty tables and curated opinions. She and I had grown up close. Then she stole a supplier contact I spent 3 months developing and used it for her own line without a word. We never discussed it. We just became careful around each other after that. That was my family. The table I sat at that evening. Derek leaned back and said his words were not personal. The wellness market was oversaturated, and without real investment, small brands like mine flatlined before they could scale. He used the word flatline the way doctors use it. Like something already dead. Sienna nodded thoughtfully, which was worse than laughing. It made everything look like concern, as if everyone at that table was simply looking out for me. My father swirled his wine and said, almost gently, "Nobody outside this family would take it seriously, Becky. That is just the reality." He looked at me. I looked back. There was nothing openly mean in his expression. He was not cruel the way someone is cruel when they want to wound you. He was honest the way someone is honest when they have already decided the truth about you and stopped questioning it. My mother Elaine sat 2 seats to my left. She turned her fork over once, looked at her plate, and said nothing. I thought about 3 years of building Oro without a day off. The supplier relationships. The late nights. The one wholesale account that had grown to 20. I said nothing. I took a slow sip of water. Then every phone at the table pinged at once. The sound was strange because it happened together. Not one after another, the way notifications usually arrive. All of them at the same moment, a single sharp chorus of buzzes and chimes running down the length of the table. Graham reached for his phone first. Then Derek. Then Sienna, already reading before the others had even unlocked their screens. I knew what it was before anyone said a word. My lawyer Vivienne had warned me the announcement might leak early. I had been watching my phone all week. The alert came from a major business newsletter with 500,000 subscribers. The headline read, Oro Wellness signs national retail partnership in deal valued at 8 figures. 8 figures. I watched Derek's face cycle through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion first. Then rereading. Then something that looked like physical discomfort. Then a careful, constructed blankness as he looked up at me. Sienna went very still. Both hands flat on the table. Eyes still fixed on her screen. My father set his phone face down without a word. The candles kept flickering. The lamb was getting cold on my plate. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate, and stood up. I thanked them for dinner. Clearly, without sarcasm, without trembling. I picked up my bag, pushed my chair in, and said I hoped they enjoyed the rest of the evening. Nobody spoke. I walked through the hallway, past the framed family portraits Graham had commissioned, past the side table with the decorative bowl of keys that had never unlocked anything, and out the front door. The night air was cold and quiet. My heels clicked on the stone path. My phone rang before I reached the car. It was Vivienne, and the first thing she said was that the announcement had leaked 3 days ahead of schedule. I stopped walking. How bad? Not bad. But someone has already been making calls. We need to talk tonight. I got into the car and sat with the engine off. Through the lit windows of my father's house, I could see my family still seated at the table. None of them had moved. The candles were still burning. I started the car and drove. That was the last dinner I sat through quietly. The announcement had not just changed what my family knew about Oro. It had changed what I was willing to accept. I did not know yet how far they would go. I was about to find out. Vivienne met me at my office at 9 that evening. She spread printed documents across my desk before I had finished taking off my coat. Someone had contacted my old accountant, Philip Hurst, who handled Oro's books during my first 2 years. The contact came through an email address tied to a family financial trust connected to Graham's holdings. Whoever sent it requested copies of my founding documents, shareholder structure, and early investment records. I sat down slowly. They moved fast, Vivienne said. Within hours of the announcement, I replied. Philip didn't release anything. He called me first. I stared at the folder. Someone at that dinner table had sent the email before I walked out the front door. The speed told me something important. This was not a reaction. This was a plan already in motion, waiting for a trigger. Someone at the table had the knowledge, the connections, and the motivation to move that quickly. I already had a feeling about who. I needed proof. I told Vivienne to document everything and make no contact with my family until further notice. She agreed. I locked the door after she left and sat alone in the quiet for a long time. The next morning, I asked my assistant Thomas to check for unusual activity on our shared business email system over the previous 2 weeks. He came back 40 minutes later looking uncomfortable. There was an email chain sent from a device logged into our company calendar, a device I did not recognize. The chain passed between 2 addresses I did not know, but one had Derek Vale in the display name. The emails discussed Oro's supplier contracts, our retail partnership timeline, and whether any gaps in the ownership structure could be explored. I read the chain twice. I asked Thomas to print a copy and lock it in my office filing cabinet. I called Vivienne. While still on the phone, my office door opened and my mother Elaine walked in. She was unscheduled, unannounced, wearing a grey coat and the particular expression she uses when she has been crying recently. Eyes slightly swollen, posture carefully composed. She said, "I needed to see you." I told Vivienne I would call back. I set the phone down. I looked at my mother and waited. Whatever she had come to say, I intended to listen to every word of it closely. Elaine said she was sorry about dinner. My father had not meant his words. The family was proud of me. They always had been. They just expressed it badly. She said it the way someone reads from a script they have memorized but not fully believed. I listened with my face open and neutral. I have learned, over years of this family, how to look receptive while watching carefully. Then she began asking questions. She asked whether the retail partnership involved changes to my board structure. She asked if outside investors held voting rights. She asked whether I had to give up signature authority over key financial decisions. She wove these into the same gentle tone she used to apologize, as if it was all still just concern. I answered without saying anything real. Legal details were still being finalized. My team was handling everything. I smiled at the right moments. But something cold and clear settled in my chest. No mother arrives unannounced to ask about voting rights unless someone has sent her with a list. I made her tea. I walked her out. Then I wrote down every question she had asked, word for word, exactly as she had phrased them. Derek arrived 2 days later with flowers. Cream roses in a tall glass vase, carried personally, which I understood was deliberate. He wanted me to see the effort before he spoke a single word. He sat down, placed the vase on my desk, and said he had been thinking. He had underestimated Oro. The announcement had shown him that clearly. As my brother, he felt responsible for not being more supportive. He delivered it smoothly, without stumbling, which told me it had been rehearsed. Then he pivoted. He said the wellness sector was at an interesting stage for investment. A business like Oro, at this exact point of growth, needed someone with serious finance experience to protect it from aggressive outside investors. He offered to help, an advisory capacity, contract reviews, a presence at key meetings. I told him I appreciated it. I asked him to send a formal written proposal so I could review it properly. He smiled and said of course. That evening, Vivienne called with news about Derek's company. It had been quietly accumulating debt for over a year and was, by every financial measure, close to collapse. The flowers were still on my desk. I moved them to the windowsill without ceremony and went back to work. I started pulling on threads that week. Slowly and carefully, the way you untangle a knot, not by yanking, but by finding the right loop and following it. The picture that emerged was not entirely new. I had felt pieces of it for years, the way you feel a draft in a room before you find the cracked window. Seeing it clearly, all at once, was still hard to absorb. My family had not simply underestimated me. They needed me to stay small. My smallness was structural. It made Graham look decisive, Derek look successful, Sienna look polished. I was the contrast, the one who had not quite figured it out. Every time I made progress, something pulled me back. An offhand comment that planted doubt. A gathering where someone laughed at the wrong moment. I had always told myself that it was just bad luck. But now, sitting with Vivienne's documents and Derek's email chain in front of me, I began to wonder whether luck had anything to do with it at all. Sienna posted that same week calling Oro's success inspiring and tagging herself as someone who had always believed in me. Within hours, hundreds of strangers were praising her for being a supportive cousin. My stomach turned. The comments under Sienna's post were full of warmth for her. People called her a good person. A few said it was rare to find a family who genuinely celebrated your wins. I sat with my phone reading all of it and felt something I had not expected. Not just anger. Something quieter and more tired. The particular exhaustion of watching someone rewrite history in public, in real time, knowing that most people had no reason to question it. Sienna had not believed in me. When my first product launch failed, she had called it what everyone expected. When I lost the supplier contact she had taken without asking, she had told me sympathetically that maybe I was not quite ready for that level yet. She had never once, in 4 years, asked how the business was going. But now she was weaving herself into the story of Oro's success before the ink on the partnership was even dry. My PR advisor Celeste told me not to respond publicly. She said timing mattered more than speed. Reacting now would make me look defensive and give Sienna more attention than she deserved. I agreed. I closed the app and said nothing. That night, an anonymous message arrived in my business inbox. 7 words. You're not the only one they lied to. I almost deleted it. Anonymous messages rarely mean anything. But the phrasing made me pause. It was not dramatic. It was not asking for anything. It was just a flat, specific statement, like someone handing me a fact they had been carrying for a long time. I replied with one question. Who is this? The response came an hour later with a name. Meris Holt. A former executive assistant who had worked for Graham for 3 years, managing his correspondence and administrative records. We met 4 days later at a coffee shop 2 towns from Maple Crest. She held her cup with both hands and looked at the table more than at me. 7 years ago, she said, I had applied for a small business development loan through a regional bank. It was early in Oro's life. I needed money for equipment and expanded production. The bank asked for a professional reference. I had listed Graham's name, thinking it would help. Maris told me Graham had quietly contacted someone at the bank and raised concerns about my financial maturity and readiness. The loan had been declined 3 weeks later. I had always believed I simply did not qualify. I had accepted that failure as entirely my own. I did not speak for a long moment after Maris finished. I looked out the window. Outside, someone walked a dog on a grey pavement, not looking at anything. I watched until they turned a corner and disappeared. Then I asked if she had proof. She had partial evidence, an internal email she kept when she left, showing Graham asking her to gather information about the loan application process and the bank contact. It stopped short of a direct confession. The strongest evidence, she said, was in Graham's archived office files documenting his correspondence over a decade. He kept meticulous records. He assumed nobody would ever use them against him. I sat with that. All those years ago, I had cried over that rejected loan. I had written a list of everything I had done wrong. I blamed my business plan, my presentation, and myself. Graham had quietly built a floor beneath my failure to make sure I stayed low enough to need him. The cruelty was not in anger. It was in patience. He had done it carefully, with no visible fingerprints. I thanked Maris. I asked if she would speak with my lawyer. She said yes without hesitating. Graham called the following week with an invitation. Sienna's engagement party. Ashbourne Hall. A Saturday evening in 3 weeks. His voice was warmer than it usually was with me. He called it a family celebration. He said it would mean a great deal if I came. He said I was part of the Vale legacy now more than ever. That phrase told me everything. He was not inviting his daughter. He was inviting Oro's founder, the 8-figure deal, the name people were now connecting to his family. He wanted my success on display, something to gesture toward during toasts. Vivienne and Celeste both advised me not to go. I said I was going. They looked at each other. Celeste began to speak and I said, gently, that I had a reason. They did not need to know the full reason yet. I just needed everything prepared before the evening. By the time of the party, Vivienne had confirmed something significant. Graham had recently moved several assets into a structure that obscured major losses from his portfolio. Derek's name was on the restructuring paperwork. They were not simply reaching for Oro. They were drowning, and they had already started stretching toward me before the water reached their chins. Ashbourne Hall was exactly what Graham loved. Large rooms, low lighting, staff in black carrying silver trays. It smelled like expensive flowers and new wealth performing old wealth. I arrived deliberately late, when the room was full and the first drinks already poured. I wore a dress the color of dark amber and spent the first 40 minutes speaking to no one from my family. I moved through the room with purpose but no urgency, the way Celeste had taught me in public spaces. Graham gave his speech midway through the evening. He spoke about family, hard work, and resilience. He mentioned twice that the Vale name stood for building something that lasts. He used my success without naming me directly, threading it through his words like something he had helped grow. I stood near the back and kept my face pleasant. Then Sienna made her toast. She lifted her glass and spoke about gratitude and new chapters. She looked across the room at me and said, warmly, that I was proof that even the least likely person can sometimes surprise us. The room laughed. Several people smiled in my direction. I smiled back. I raised my glass. And privately, quietly, I opened my phone and sent Vivienne a single word. Go. The legal shield went up over the following 72 hours without a single public announcement. Vivienne's team restructured Oro's ownership protections, closing every loophole that could allow outside parties, including family-connected ones, to claim proxy access or request internal documents without my direct written authorization. Every legacy permission from the company's early days was reviewed and either updated or cancelled. I changed the access credentials on every system. I instructed my current accountant and legal team that any third-party requests about Oro required authorization signed by me personally and verified through a secondary contact. Derek had no idea any of this was happening. He sent his formal investment proposal on a Thursday afternoon, a polished 12-page document with clean formatting and careful language. I read every page twice. On page 9, Buried inside a longer paragraph about risk management was a clause. It used cautious legal phrasing that, translated plainly, meant, in the event of any dispute, Derek would hold quiet influence over key company decisions. I printed that page. I highlighted the clause. I placed it inside the folder Vivienne had labeled, evidence. He had wrapped a takeover attempt inside a proposal. He had dress control in the language of brotherly concern. I had it in writing now. I had everything I needed. Elaine came back a second time, but this visit was different. No tears. No carefully composed posture. She arrived early on a Tuesday, sat down without being invited, and looked at me directly in a way she almost never did. She had something to tell me. I folded my hands on my desk and waited. She said Graham had always chosen image over everything else. The jokes at my expense, the years of being treated as the lesser one, none of it was accidental. I reminded Graham of his own mother Vivian, the only person who had ever openly challenged him. Vivian had strong opinions, an independent mind, and no patience for performance. Graham had resented and feared her. When he recognized those same qualities in me, the stubbornness, the refusal to need his approval, he had responded the only way he knew. By trying to make me feel small before I could grow large enough to threaten him. The confession cracked something open. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to my face. But before she left, she paused at the door and said quietly that there was one thing about how Oro had begun that I still did not know. She was gone before I could ask what she meant. I had always believed the small anonymous investment that kept Oro alive in its first 6 months had come from a stranger. A micro-investor who found my crowdfunding page. It was only $4,000, but it arrived at the exact moment I was about to shut everything down. Vivienne did quiet digging after Elaine's visit, following a thread my mother had shared in a brief phone call. The investment had not come from a stranger. It came from my grandmother Vivian Ashrow, who had passed away 14 months before Oro launched. She had set aside money in a private arrangement, with instructions to route it anonymously to any business I started within 5 years of her death. Her former personal attorney, a quietly spoken man named Bertram Cook, had carried out her instructions exactly as she had asked. I sat with that for a long time. The one person in my family dismissed as difficult and old-fashioned had seen something in me and protected it in silence, without asking for anything in return. Without even letting me know it was her. She had funded the first breath of the thing they had spent years trying to smother. Bertram Cook called Vivienne and said he needed to meet me urgently. There was more. Bertram was in his 70s, precise in the way of someone who has spent decades handling others' most important documents. He met me in a small conference room and placed a sealed envelope on the table before saying a single word. Vivian had also left a conditional inheritance. It was not connected to the family estate Graham controlled. It was tied to a commercial property in Belmere City, a valuable building Graham had been using through a lease arrangement Vivian set up during her lifetime. The condition was specific. If Becky Vale built an independent business that sustained itself without the Vale family name, connections, or funding, she would inherit a controlling share in the property. Graham had known this condition for years. He had received the terms after Vivian's death. He had never told me. He had assumed I would never qualify. He had underestimated exactly how quietly and stubbornly I would build Oro without asking anyone for anything. I looked at the sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting, careful and slightly formal, just as I remembered from birthday cards she sent when I was young. I opened it. 1 page. By the 3rd sentence, I was crying and not trying to stop. Derek called me at 11 that night, furious in the way he usually concealed behind politeness. He had found out about the inheritance through Graham, who had discovered that Bertram had contacted me. I never learned exactly how Graham found out so quickly. I assumed he had people watching, the way people do when they have spent years managing information carefully. Derek said I had manipulated a grieving old woman. He said I had played the underdog for years, collecting sympathy to eventually use for financial gain. He said I was destroying the family over a building. I let him talk without interrupting. When he stopped, I said goodnight and ended the call. 30 minutes later, Graham called. He was not loud, which was somehow more unsettling than shouting. He told me to remember where I came from. He used the phrase "the bigger picture" twice. I recognized it for what it was. Panic. He had built his position partly on Vivian's property and had assumed that foundation was permanent. He had never believed I would become someone with the legal standing to touch it. By the end of that evening, someone had leaked a false story to 3 online business news sites claiming Oro's partnership numbers were inflated. The campaign to destroy my credibility had officially started. I woke up to 14 Google alerts. 2 mid-size financial blogs had published the rumors. One had run a speculative piece questioning Oro's partnership valuation, with absolutely no facts behind any of it. My team gathered at 8. Celeste was already on the phone. Vivian had printed every claim circulating online. I told everyone to stay calm. I had kept records since before that first dinner. Every supplier contract. Every bank transfer. Every piece of retail correspondence. Every independent audit across 4 years of Oro's growth, not because I had predicted this exact moment, but because I had always known, somewhere underneath everything, that I would one day need to defend what I had built. We published a formal response by noon. No emotion, no defensiveness, just documents. Supplier verification letters. Independently audited sales results. Confirmed purchase orders. A certified growth timeline from Oro's founding day to the present. The rumors collapsed within 24 hours. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way false things fall when you place real things beside them. Vivian's team traced the leak to a shell communications firm connected to one of Derek's associates. I added it to the folder, closed my laptop, and kept working. Sienna called me privately 2 weeks after the rumors died. She asked if we could meet. I agreed. She arrived without the performance she usually wore in public. No careful makeup. No practiced lightness in her voice. She sat across from me and looked tired in a way I had not seen before. She said she was sorry for the post. She had tried to attach herself to something she had not earned, and she understood I already knew what she had done with the supplier contact years ago. She did not make excuses. Then she told me about Derek. Graham had, for years, quietly shaped how the family spoke about me at gatherings. Not through cruelty at the table, that was Derek's approach. Graham had done it earlier, in smaller rooms, before the meal started. He had framed me as uncertain, unstable, too emotional to be taken seriously, and had been doing it since I was in my mid-20s, around the time I first spoke seriously about building Oro. Then she lowered her voice. Derek was worse than I knew. He had secretly used family assets, including assets connected to the Belmere property, as collateral for a loan to cover his company's debt. He had pledged something that was never his to pledge. Vivian confirmed it by the following morning. Derek had used a portion of the Belmere property as collateral in a private lending arrangement, signing through a subsidiary that obscured his involvement. He had done it 8 months ago. Graham knew, because the property was in an arrangement Graham managed. Graham had said nothing, because to expose Derek was to expose himself. They had both assumed the property was permanently theirs. Vivian's condition had never been met, until Oro. Until me. I arranged a meeting. Not at Graham's house. Not at a restaurant. I chose a room inside the Belmere building itself, a clean, well-lit space on the 2nd floor that Bertram arranged access to. I did not give Graham or Derek the location until the morning of. I wanted them to walk in and understand what the room was before they sat down. They arrived together. Graham in a dark coat, Derek half a step behind. They stopped in the doorway and looked at the room, at Vivian and her colleague already seated, at the stacked folders, at me standing at the far end. Graham recovered first. He straightened and walked in as if this were a meeting he had arranged. I let him sit down. I waited for Derek to sit too. Then I began. I did not raise my voice once. I walked them through every document. The sabotaged loan application from 7 years ago. Maris Holt's statement. Derek's proposal with the hidden governance clause highlighted. The shell firm traced back to the rumor campaign. The collateral paperwork filed on property Derek had no right to pledge. I placed each document in front of them as I spoke. Graham tried to speak twice in the first 10 minutes. The first time, he began calling the loan situation a misunderstanding. I moved to the next document before he finished the sentence. The second time, he said I was being disloyal. I looked at him and said, quietly, that no real family would have done what they did to me first. Derek tried to blame Sienna. Then the economic climate. Then he said the collateral issue was a technicality any lawyer could resolve. Vivienne's colleague said, without expression, that it was not a technicality. Pledging an asset with a pending conditional title claim constituted financial fraud. The room went quiet. Graham stared at his hands on the table. He said nothing for a full 30 seconds. And in that silence I understood something I had not expected. He was not angry. He was afraid. He had been afraid of me for a very long time. I did not seek public destruction. What I wanted was what my grandmother had believed I deserved, the right to what I had earned, free from people who spent years making sure I never earned it. Derek lost access to the Belmere property. The collateral arrangement dissolved quietly. His company did not recover and he stepped away from public business life within the year. Graham was forced out of the management arrangement. He kept his personal holdings, because I did not go further than what was legally mine. But the control he had maintained for 30 years began unraveling under its own weight. Investors pulled back. Sienna disappeared from public view. Elaine moved out and wrote to me monthly, short, careful letters. I read every one. Oro's national launch happened in Belmere City on a bright Thursday morning. I stood at the front and spoke about building without permission, about trusting a vision when people around you call it small. I did not mention my family. Months later, I used a portion of Oro's profits to start a foundation for women building businesses without family support. I named it after my grandmother Vivienne. That evening, every phone at my father's table pinged again. Just the world catching up to something she had always known.